afraid, and I am afraid. I was petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side. Come on, you know this, right? But then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong, and I grew strong, and I learned how to get along. Come on. And so you're back from outer space. You guys are bad. Oh God, I thought it was gonna be full of enthusiasm, full of enthusiasm. Released, on October 1978, "I Will Survive" was a 70s disco hit song performed by singer Gloria Gaynor. She was describing the personal strength of a person after a breakup. The song was number one in the Billboard in 1979, was recalled as a symbol of female empowerment, was selected for preservation in the National Record Registry in the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, and artistically significant. Is probably the most preferred song performed by drag queens in New York City during the 1980s. And at every karaoke bar, probably every night, at least one person will sing this song. And I think it is because surviving is something that is extremely important. I mean, we all want to survive, don't we? How do we know that we will survive? It is hard for us to know. But Moses learned to know how because God taught him, because God led him, because God showed him what survival was about. We apologize to the Zoom people. I'm going to try to scream. Okay? We all know the story of Moses. Moses was charged with taking the people of Israel out of Egypt and into the wilderness. Moses. Moses, the guy with the messiest life of all. First of all, Moses was the guy who was born because of the lies of Sifra and Pua, right? Who didn't follow the orders of Pharaoh to be able to kill all the boys. Moses started a life of full disease because Moses was hidden for 3 months, so nobody knew that he existed. When Pharaoh's daughter found Moses, and think about this, that was deceived when the sister suggested to take the baby to an Israelite mother to feed the baby who happened to be Moses' mother, who was the one who nursed him. And then Moses grew up to be a bicultural, probably raised like a biracial kid because he had to manage Hebrew and Egypt identities. Moses killed a man who made him a murderer. And then he ran away from the law who made him a fugitive. What a mess of a guy. Moses was definitely not a perfect guy. Moses felt he had enough reasons to doubt that he was going to be the one that God needed to call. He had proven that he was a survivor. But Moses did something that it was really right. When God called, he said, "Here I am, Lord." It probably took him no time to realize that after God's call, he was going to have to use all his skills to survive, and not just him, to make sure that the people, the messy people of Israel, will also survive. Surviving for Moses became a community enterprise. And because it was about the community of God, the surviving was framed within a spiritual framework and led to spiritual growth. So the type of surviving that Moses led with the people of Israel was just not a surviving to stay alive. It was a surviving under God's grace. Surviving under God's grace. What a difficult thing for us to do today. We are trained to survive. When we see danger coming to us, we run away. When we see the person we don't trust, we take the other sidewalk. This is survival skills for us. But when we live a life to try to survive in God's grace, the rules change and it becomes more difficult. The Cursillo weekend last weekend was absolutely amazing. And if you have any doubts, just ask Jason and ask Emily. When you look at them today and they still look like helium balloons floating in the sky. It was absolutely amazing. And coming back to the real world is a difficult thing to do. The real world where we live is not a kumbaya of love and happy clapping people. It is a world where we see hatred and we see injustice and we see oppression, and it slices out of our hearts sometimes the charm of the love of Jesus. The conflict between Israel and Palestine is heavy in our hearts. In 2019, I had the opportunity to go to Holy Land with a group of about 25 other people from the diocese. I was a seminarian and I was like the sub-deacon, right? It was a beautiful experience for me. But I'm going to tell you the best experience that I had was not floating on the Dead Sea, which actually was really kind of cool. The best or praying at the wall, which is extremely spiritual and powerful. It was a dinner that we had at a house of a Palestinian family. Palestinian family. We got to know who they were. They cooked for us. They brought their adult kids. One of their daughters was a physician who worked in Israel. She had to cross the danger of that border every day, show credentials to be able to get to work, and then being able to come right back every day. You know, it sounded like a complicated, difficult thing to do. For me, it was challenging, but then it was normal. I wonder if today they are okay. I wonder if they feel safe. I wonder if they are surviving. I wonder if they still think if they walk with God. Because today, it does not matter how close or how far you are to Gaza. If you are a Palestinian, you probably feel in danger and you're afraid of surviving. The task that God gave to Moses was not an easy task. It was just not about getting the people out of Egypt to the promised land. It was way much more than that. Think about this. Surviving under God's grace required to teach the people to change the way they view themselves. In chapter 6 of Exodus, it reads that the people of Israel was going to be God's people and but they were just not ready. They had hearts of slavery. They felt, they knew all the reality was being a slave. So in order for them to be able to be sons and daughters of the king, they needed to be retrained about freedom. There's a reason why they went to the wilderness. If they would have gone the easy route, the Philistines were going to capture them and were going to make them slaves again. So God sent them to the wilderness because nobody else was going to go there. Gave enough time for them to be retrained, to be able to struggle with God, to be able to go back and forth, to be able to develop a relationship until they were ready to be able to be the people of God. God restored, reshaped the Israelites, and this happened through a constant conversation between Moses and God. Moses' call was a difficult one, which is why the scripture says that Moses was the only prophet who saw God face to face. Wow. Face to face. Something else is interesting about this. There's a line in the story that Diane read that, listen, I get emotional every time I read it, right? And I'm trying to put myself together so I don't cry again, right? But this line touches me deeply. It says, the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. It breaks my heart. Do you know what it is to go through all of this with the hope of a promised land, and you never put your foot there? You never made it there. It was vast. It probably would have taken him 2 days just to touch the land. And God said, no. And Moses died. He saw the land. I think that in that last conversation with God, imperfect, sinner, biracial, murderer, fugitive, slow of speech, slow of tongue, and argumentative, Moses realized that the promised land was not about the land. It was about the promise. The story of Moses, the life of Moses, was not about the outcome. It was about the process. It was that finally understanding that the redeeming God who forgave him for everything he's done, who started you when he said, here I am, Lord, that God was the one who made the promise. The promise that you and I were going to be the people of God. The promise that God will always walk with us. The promise that we will have hope, that we will stay together in struggles and in triumphs and in defeat and in victory and in times of war and in times of peace. The promise that we will survive under God's grace. Because perhaps the difference between Gloria Gaynor and us is that surviving is not just about staying alive and being okay, but surviving is about walking through life with that promise that God always walks with us and share that promise with those around us. I do not know what is happening with that Palestine family who hosts me and Kevin and Gerald, who was there too. I pray that they are safe and that wherever they are aware of the presence of God with them. I pray that they have found people around them who responded, "Here I am, Lord," to the calling of helping others, to participate in humanitarian efforts and who delivered the promise and hope of freedom. I pray for God's comfort and mercy to reach all those who are afraid, who suffer, who are in pain, who grieve, and those who have been cut off from loved ones. In Israel, in Gaza, in Maine, and in Birmingham, Alabama. Right now, I feel that praying is the only way I can say, "Here I am, Lord." And I do not know what is going to happen with these conflicts, but I do know one thing. I know that the story of the people of God is not going to end with the one who says, "Here I am, Lord," because the story of the people of God continues with the next person who's going to say, "Here I am." It is a never-ending story. I say, "Here I am," so you say, "Here I am," so the next person says, "Here I am," and the other person says, "Here I am," and it is a story of continuation, a story that promises that we will survive under God's grace. Because God is a God of survival, the God who walks with us at every step of the process of surviving the challenges and dysfunctions of the world around us. Today, I think about my life, and I think of all I have survived. Today, I look at you, and I think of the parts of your life that you have shared with me. And I see a group of survivors, of soldiers of God, who have fought the fight of life with faith and fortitude. We have survived under God's grace. And for that survival, I am deeply, deeply grateful. Our survival reflects the promise of God in our lives. And when we recognize such promise, we have no other option than to be grateful. And gratitude, my friends, gratitude is a spiritual practice. It's a spiritual practice that brings awareness to the fact that our survival is dependent on God and is shared with each other. At Grace Church, we create a place for the fittest to lead, the weakest to become stronger, the hopeless to find hope, the hungry to be fed, the prisoners to find freedom. It is our survival strategy, the strategy that we have used to be who we are as a congregation today. It is a strategy that inspires and motivates us to use and share all we have, our talents, our gifts, our challenges, our resources, all we have, so we can live our Christian covenant with the conviction that we will survive and we can deliver the promise to others that they will also survive. Perhaps the question to ask ourselves is, how are we willing to share of ourselves, to help others live the promise of surviving under God's grace? How are we going to do that? And the deepest question for you, if you are asked, would you answer, "Here I am, Lord"? Would you? Moisés es uno de los personajes más interesantes de la Biblia. Nació de la desobediencia de Sifra y Puá. Empezó su vida ocultando creció bicultural, navegó identidades egipcias y hebreas, mató a otro hombre, lo que lo hizo un asesino, y huyó de la justicia, lo que lo hizo un fugitivo. Moisés le dijo que sí al Señor, reconociendo que todas sus destrezas de sobrevivencia las iba a tener que utilizar para poder liberar al pueblo judío de la esclavitud. Al decir sí a Dios, Moisés entró en un proceso de entrenamiento para una sobrevivencia bajo la gracia de Dios. Hoy en día estamos viviendo un mundo de guerras y de luchas y de odio, y tal vez más que nunca antes necesitamos herramientas para sobrevivir. Y yo a veces pienso, ay Dios, ¿por qué me envías otra vez a Moisés? El trabajo de Moisés no fue solamente llevarlos a la tierra prometida, una tierra en la que Moisés nunca pisó, pero que Dios le mostró antes de morir. El trabajo fue educar al pueblo de Israel a liberarse de su mentalidad de esclavos y permitir que Dios los transformara, los restaurara y los redefiniera como hijos e hijas de Dios. Y en ese proceso, Moisés entendió que la promesa de la tierra prometida no era sobre la tierra, sino que era sobre la promesa de que Dios iba a caminar con ellos siempre en esperanza y en medio de las luchas, los triunfos y las vicisitudes.